So let's get going. I'm just going to give the bio for our moderator for this panel, Radical Work, which is Dr. Makeda Best. Makeda then will read the bios of the panelists. So Dr. Makeda Best is a curator, a writer, an educator, and historian of American photography. Since 2023, she has served as the Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Oakland Museum of California. She came to OMCA after serving at Harvard University Art Museums from 2017 to 2023. There she was the Menschel Curator of Photography and an interim division head of the Modern and Contemporary Art Division. Her exhibitions include, at Harvard, Crossing Lines, Constricting Home, Displacement and Belonging in Contemporary Art, Winslow Homer, Eyewitness, The Time Is Now, Photography and Social Change in James Baldwin's America, and Devour the Land, War and American Landscape Photography, whose catalog was awarded the Catalog of the Year at the 2022 Paris Photo Aperture Photo Book Awards. She currently has an exhibition, which I learned some of you have already seen, at the International Center for Photography in New York. It's called American Job, 1940 to 2011. At Harvard, Best was also a popular and award-winning lecturer, teaching such courses as photography and ecology for the Department of Art, Film, and Visual Studies. Before her appointment at Harvard, she was assistant professor at the University of Vermont. Then she returned to her hometown of San Francisco, where she was assistant professor of the history of art and visual culture here at CCA. So we're so glad to have her back, a native San Franciscan, back in the Bay Area, and of course, back on the CCA campus. And she lives just up the street from me in Noe Valley, so I'm really thrilled. Best is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Elevate the Masses, Alexander Gardner, Photography and Democracy in 19th Century America, published in 2020. She's contributed to multiple exhibition catalogs, journals, and scholarly publications. Most recently, she's written on Ruth Asawa, Betty Saar, Imogen Cunningham, and Daryl Ellis. So please welcome Dr. Makeda.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you all for this amazing convening today. It is my pleasure to introduce the panelists today. And again, having grown up here, if you grew up here, you have lived and experienced so much of the work of these panelists, and it's really just an honor to be here. Devorah Major is an American writer, poet, performer, essayist, editor, recording artist, and educator. She has won awards in poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction, and is San Francisco's 3rd Poet Laureate. She is a former poet in residence at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Professor Major is the author of 3 novels, 5 books of poetry, and numerous other single pieces of poetry and writings. Her novels tend to follow a general theme of being, family, and community. Her most recent poetry contemplates a combination of what it means to be human with ideas about the universe at large. She connects this idea by addressing what it means to be human within the bounds of this vast universe. Major has been involved in the Daughters of Yam, a poetry performance group with Opal Palmer Disa for over 20 years. Daughters of the Yam released 1 book, 2 chapbooks, 1 poetry, and jazz recordings. Hired here at the California College of the Arts in 2000, she taught at CCA's programs in writing and literature and critical ethnic studies. She retired just a few years ago and is really missed. Prior to joining CCA, Professor Major has taught at New College and lectured, New College of California, for those of you who remember that, and lectured at numerous institutions such as Stanford University, San Jose State University, and Humboldt College. She has held workshops for poetry performance at Laney College and has led individual writing sessions for emerging and experienced writers. Professor Major graduated from San Francisco State University in 1976, where she studied African American Studies and Health Education. She was a CETA worker at the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society. She was a librarian and poet in residence in the still extant and important cultural center known locally as AAACC. When we asked Professor Major about her time as a CETA worker assigned to AAACC, she told us that during that time, Dewey Crumpler was the AACC executive director, an abstract painter, Arthur Monroe was the curator. She said, "We did a lot. Today, we're so primed to hear more about those days." Nancy Hom is an artist, writer, organizer, curator, arts administrator, and arts consultant with over 35 years of experience in the nonprofit arts field. Hom served as the executive director of the Kearney Street Workshop in San Francisco from 1995 to 2003. When she started her role, Hom was working with the first ever board of directors for the organization, and at the time, the Kearney Street Workshop was located on the ground floor of the I Hotel. In December 1995, the Kearney Street Workshop was forced to move locations and restructure the program into a nonprofit, which was led by Hom. She was born in Guangdong, China, and came to the United States when she was 5 years old. She grew up in New York City and graduated from Pratt Institute with a BFA degree in 1971. She moved to San Francisco in 1974. Nancy Hom is a prolific artist who produced silk screens and mixed media work. Much of her poster art is graphic and political. Her art has been exhibited in numerous galleries locally and internationally, including the De Young Museum, Stanford University, the Desassay Museum, the Intersection for the Arts, the California Historical Society, the San Francisco International Airport, and in numerous international venues. Her artwork is in many permanent collections, including the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas, the Oakland Museum of California, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. Her work is archived at the California Ethnic and Multicultural Archives at the University of California at Santa Barbara. She is a member of the Asian American Women Artists Association. Dewey Crumpler. Dewey Crumpler is an American artist and educator. He was born in 1949 in Magnolia, Arkansas. He grew up in Hunters Point, a historically Black neighborhood of San Francisco, and attended Balboa High School, an arts magnet school, graduating in 1967. Subsequently, Crumpler graduated with a BFA in 1972 from the San Francisco Art Institute, an MA in 1974 from the San Francisco State University, and an MFA in 1989 from Mills College. In 1989, Crumpler joined the SFAI's faculty as a professor of history and studio art at SFAI, where his notable students included Kehinde Wiley. He worked at SFAI until its closing in 2022. Going back in 1974, Dewey Crumpler was commissioned to do a mural at George Washington High School. To prepare, he traveled to Mexico, where he sought advice from the expatriate African-American artist Elizabeth Catlett. Catlett, in turn, connected him with muralist David Alfaro Siqueiros and the American expatriate Pablo O'Higgins in Mexico City. He subsequently completed the Washington High School mural project called Multi-Ethnic Heritage as a response to Victor Antonoff's Life of Washington. It is a figurative composition of Black American heroes presented alongside conceptual and abstract symbols of Third World coalition, unity, and resilience. Some of these convenings attendees toured it. The hot colors and bold forms of multi-ethnic heritage are evident in some of Professor Crumpler's current work. Vibrant dreamscapes weighted with the gravitas of their subject matter, mass migration, globalization, cultural commodification, and the tangled yoke of capitalism within the Black diaspora. His recent work also integrates digital imagery and video from traditional painting. His work is in the permanent collections of SF MoMA, the Young Museum, the Oakland Museum of California, and the California African American Museum of Los Angeles. He has received many honors, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. In 2024, the Driscoll Center Archive at the University of Maryland at College Park acquired his archive of his sketchbooks, correspondence, writings, records of awards, commissions, photographs, and related ephemera. He is represented by Jenkins Johnson's gallery. And finally, Bob Hsiang is a Chinese-American photographer who has been active in New York and in the San Francisco Bay Area. For over 30 years of experience, with his over 30 years of experience in still photography, he's worked in fields of special events, product photography, fine art reproduction, and studio portraiture. His career has spanned the areas of photojournalism, lifestyle, and editorial pieces. His career began as a photojournalist in the 1960s when he attended the University at Buffalo in New York, from which he graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology. As a self-educated photographer, he became editor of the university newspaper and covered events relevant to the political protests of the time. In 1974, he moved to San Francisco and began photographing for cultural and art organizations such as the Kearney Street Workshop and Asian American Theater Company, where he covered topics related to Asian American awareness and the international hotel struggle for low-income housing. Bob's work is in the University of California, Santa Barbara Library's Special Collections at the University of California, Santa Barbara. In this collection, he captured 29 still photographs of various plays produced by the Asian American Theater Company from the late 1960s to 1970s. Hsiang's studio photography is close to our location today in San Francisco's Design District. We're glad to have him, a photographer with more than 25 years of experience in the field as a neighbor and a San Francisco artist, activist, and documentarian. So please welcome our panelists. Thanks so much. So I think it would be wonderful to start with just sharing with us how you learned about the work of CETA. What had you been doing at that time, and what was your your artistic circle? Maybe we'll start with you, Devorah.
I was having a baby. Truly, that's why I was unemployed for the period that was required. And then my partner was also a librarian, actually, at the San Francisco Public Library under CETA. And 3 people couldn't live off of that. So I went to look for work that would work with my artist sensibility, and the African American Historical and Cultural Society had an opening for a librarian. And I was a writer, and I read, and they hired me. I went to libraries a lot, and their library was books on shelves. That's what it was, books on shelves. They weren't in any order. There were just lots of them. And so I began to figure out a way. I talked to some people. They said, set up your own system. Don't use Dewey Decimal, because there won't be enough to be worth all that work. And what I have to say about CETA, for me, was CETA was a door. It wasn't the CETA arts job per se, it was a door. I'm sitting there being a librarian, and somebody walks in and says, oh, I'm so glad to see you. We're doing a production with poetry and music. Give me some poems, maybe we'll take one. So I did, and I got paid for the poem, more than I was getting for CETA for that one. And I went to the show, and it was performed. And then she came back, and she said, here's an application. It was a Tuesday. We worked Tuesday through Saturday, right? It was a Tuesday, and it was due on Friday for me to be a California Art Council artist in residence. So I went to Dewey, and I said, Dewey, I just got handed this application, but it requires the board to sign off, and should I take the trouble to fill it out? He said, don't worry, I've got the board. And so I shifted, I got the residency, I was one, and I shifted from being a CETA artist to being a poet in residence. So that's what I mean by CETA was a doorway for me. Now I have to say the one thing I did besides that as librarian before I became poet in residence was I happened to know some young radical black men, possibly because my family was always radical, I'm not sure, including my nephew who said, well, you're a poet and you're here, we have Saturday school, which I think that's gonna be starting back up again. And so they brought me a bunch of black kids to poet to. And so I worked there, I read them books, I talked to them about stuff, and they came one Saturday a month, because Saturday school, they did different things different Saturdays, and I was the literature Saturday. And so that was my opportunity to, encourage other young people. And I don't know if Tonga was there or at Malcolm X Freedom School. I just know Tonga Martin Eisen. I just know I was his first poetry teacher. And so it's funny how things go on. I mean, he was in 4th grade, okay? I wasn't like a sophisticated poet, so.
Nancy?
Well, my husband, Bob Hsiang, and I decided to go to San Francisco from New York City in 1974. And we had already been part of the Asian American movement in New York City. I graduated from Pratt in 1971. So I had 3 years of kind of immersion into political activism then. And as a Pratt student, I was groomed to be part of the art world, or at least part of the advertising world, and I knew that wasn't for me. And I was looking for something to do with my art that would be meaningful to a community. I had that instinct in me. And when we went to San Francisco, I heard about Kearny Street Workshop, and I immediately went there. They were immersed in a struggle inside the International Hotel where they were located. The I Hotel was kind of home to mostly elderly Filipino residents, mostly men, single men, and they were facing eviction. It was a 10-year battle, and Kearny Street Workshop being there was also part of that struggle. And I was drawn to that, and not only that, but in 1974, Kearny Street Workshop acquired the Jackson Street Gallery, which was around the corner from the workshop, which had gallery and performance space and a block-long area for a mural. And I thought, mural? I'm so down for that. And so right away from 1974, I was already joining Kearny Street Workshop and went there every day to take poetry classes and whatever workshops were offered, and also to help with the gallery and produce shows there. And so when the CETA call came out, and it goes through Kearny Street Workshop, because at that time, Kearny Street Workshop was one of the places that knew about these things right away. I was the second wave of CETA. I think and my memory is a little faded, but I think it was 1976, the mid of 1976, when I got the call and I ran there to apply. And I got in because I had all this experience with Kearny Street Workshop. I was hired. I wanted the silkscreen job because I was just getting into silkscreen, but that was taken. So I was hired as a curator at large for the city's 6 cultural centers that they had just. They purchased 5 of them, and then the 6th one, they rented space inside the Hilton Hotel for the Chinese Cultural Centers. It wasn't the Chinese Cultural Center, it was called the Chinatown Community Arts Gallery. And I was the at-large, which meant that I was to assist in all these centers. And so that's how I got into CETA. I can talk more later about what CETA has meant for me, because being at large, it wasn't so much about what I did as an artist there. And I barely remember a lot of the shows I produced. Mm-hmm. But what was significant to me about CETA was the breadth of cultures I was exposed to, because I had to go to every neighborhood. There were neighborhood art centers, and I was stationed in Chinatown, Manila Town before then. So for me to be in the Mission and get to know that culture and that community, and for me to be at Western Addition Cultural Center and Soul Marts and just the whole breadth of the city was available to me. Yeah. That was amazing.
That's so beautiful. Nancy, before we go on, you were involved also with community murals, weren't you? There's a magazine. Were you involved with that? A magazine called Community Murals?
Yes, I was. I was, I'm not a muralist per se. I've done a couple, but I was deeply involved with a lot of different disciplines. I was involved in the Community Murals magazine, and Lincoln Cushion was too. Mm-hmm. He's sitting there.
Yeah, no, I saw this little consolation. I was like, this is incredible.
Yes.
Yeah, Pop.
Yeah, I just want to go through the pre-CETA period. I was an undergraduate student at University of Buffalo, SUNY at Buffalo, And I was actually pegged to be a doctor. I was in pre-med, but I sort of got disillusioned, and I got involved in editorial and reportage at the newspaper. And as soon as the Vietnam War became a major issue, nationwide, I got really involved in the protests and documenting the brutality the police were, incurring on students and whatnot. I got very impassioned about it, and I decided to change my career path. Instead of being, pre-med and whatnot, I went into art and photojournalism. So after Buffalo, I came to New York, and I began to photograph Chinese American community, and also the uptown community near Columbia University. We were involved in a squatters movement called Chickens Come Home to Roost. How this relates to CETA, I'll kind of merge that into one subject. But I was actually working as a biologist, a technician at Einstein Medical College. And it was my day job, and I did it well, and I was able to do my photography, on the weekends at night or whatever. And Nancy and I started a media collective called the Asian Media Collective, involved in presenting this side of Chinese American life that nobody ever saw before, because the media just kind of bulldozed it and never really reported on it. So this is a kind of idealistic way of presenting a new way of looking at the community. And then New York City recession happened. It was a very deep recession. I think they were saying that New York City was going broke around 1973, 74. And I lost my job. It was with NIH, and I guess the granting, the funding kind of stopped or whatever. So I was on unemployment. And Nancy was working at a publisher, and she was doing fine. But we were in a tenement that was being raised by real estate developers to create, a luxury kind of small little apartments, but very expensive rent, just typical. So we decided to pack up our little car, our Saab, and we drove across country. And I had been to San Francisco before. I really liked it. It was alternative, and it was cool, and it was like jazz and poetry. I said, well, it would be perfect for us. So we hopped in the car, and we drove across the Golden Gate Bridge, and there we are, We finally settled into Mission, and guess what? We had no jobs. We had some savings, so we lived on our savings, and we found Kearny Street Workshop, they were involved with a great struggle with the city and with the developers who wanted to basically remove and eradicate the entire Manilatown community. So we got involved in that struggle, me as a photographer, Nancy as a curator, and as a silkscreen artist. And still, we didn't have any real work. We were still collecting unemployment. Then CETA came along. So I want to thank John and your cohorts for doing this incredible work of bringing art into the communities through this work study program. Basically, I'm self-taught. I don't have any advanced degrees or anything like that. I've always been kind of a self-starter. And CETA, through the venue of the Young Art School, enabled me to actually learn on my own, because I didn't have all the basics of photography down. I had enough, that I could, develop my own pictures and whatnot. But the CETA program gave me a base and allowed me to kind of grow my skills and to be able to meet people all over the city, not just at Golden Gate Park where I was stationed. But there, of course, John Worley, the great artist, muralist, he was painting a huge environmental mural. Of course, it's been destroyed since then, but he was one of the CETA artists as well. And the Young Art School provided classes in ceramics, photography, drawing, and various other disciplines. So I was one of the instructors there. So I taught myself to teach, because I'd never taught before. But I found it a very fulfilling experience, learning how to teach other people how to, draw them into photography and give them the basics on how to develop film and whatnot. At the same time, I started getting my large format skills together. I bought myself a 4x5 camera and taught myself how to use it, and I began to freelance as an art photographer, meaning that I was able to document other artists' work, which became kind of a bedrock of my kind of breadwinning income, as it were. But from there, I was able to expand my photographic vocabulary into theater, into music, into slide photography, audiovisual. Elsa Cameron was my boss, basically, and she opened up an art center on Howard Street. I don't know if people remember. It was a kind of a red brick building, and she converted it into a downtown gallery, which was a lot of fun. Her exhibits were very kind of cutesy. She had a thing called Dog Show, talk about dogs all over the world, the history of dog culture. Something that you wouldn't find at the Young, or at the Modern. So I became the audiovisual specialist there. So we created audiovisual shows and whatnot. And then eventually CETA came to an end. But my career from there, because I really felt like it allowed me to grow my skills to the point where I could service any community. So I started getting work with the Asian American Theater Company. I became their main photographer. I started working with the Eureka, the Magic Theater, other local non-commercial theaters. I had a special interest in music, so I began to photograph the nascent Asian American jazz movement, which started in the late 70s. Mark Izu was one of the major components of, figures in that movement, and we worked with him. So that's sort of how CETA helped me grow out of one circle and merge into other circles of culture. That's about
Thank
it.
you. I love that. Dewey?
I've been trying, as I've been listening to my colleagues here, particularly Deborah, how I first became knowledgeable about CETA, but I think it was through my relationship to the Art Commission and Martin Snipper and Stephen Goldstein particularly, because I had been working with them on mural projects that I was doing in the Hunters Point and Fillmore. And I was able to get money to get the materials, but I was having a problem getting paid. And so I think it was either Martin or I'm sorry, I can't remember that far because it was in the early 70s. And I'd just come back from my last trip to Mexico, and I wanted to create these murals, one in a school that I'd gone to as a elementary school, so that I could exercise something that I'd learned in Mexico that would help me finish up some of the work I was doing on a couple of murals. And I think they told me to go and talk to Kreidler. I think that I went and met with Kreidler, who I was really impressed with. You saw that young picture of him. And I recognized it immediately because I had to go and speak in front of this person who I was trying to figure out who, what his MO was at that time. And I found him pleasurable and serious. And CETA had a component that connected you to the community. And I was really about that. And so it was through those connections that I actually got the gig that I had for really quite some time during the 1970s. I think you could work on it for a period of time, and then you could continue, something like that, because I remember the last mural that I did on CETA, on the CETA project, was at the Joseph Lee Gym. And I was painting this mural, and the movie Roots had come out, and there was a lot of activity in Hunters Point where this mural was, and under those funds, I was able to accomplish that entire mural. And then 5 or 6 years later, I came back and completed the whole building, which was really quite massive. But it was CETA that gave me the funding and the opportunity to teach young people, young children, some of whom I was hoping to inspire to want to go into the field of creativity. And I think that happened because some of them I know now who saw me hanging on those scaffolds and went on to want to become artists themselves. So CETA really provided me with the opportunity to do two things. One was to fill up the Black environment with information that I was hoping would inspire them, and I tried to do it in a way that was complex so that it would provoke questions, and in the way that the murals I saw in Mexico had provoked all these questions in me. So I thought this would be a great opportunity. And so CETA provided that. And that's sort of how I remember being involved with CETA for about 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's so interesting listening to you all, because I think one of the things you're surfacing, especially for audiences today, is the way that artists have to work, and the artist as like it is labor, and the economics of art making, which is not so much talked about today. I think that it's so important. And each of you you've touched on this a little bit, but how did CETA inform your own kind of artistic development? It sounds like having access to communities, to being able to shape a kind of sense of an interaction that you wanted to have. But how do you think that it shaped your kind of development as an artist or as a creative person?
Well, in my own case, it was being able to experiment on walls, because I was only interested in walls that presented some problem. Some architectural problem, and CETA gave me the room to be able to do that, to really work those problems out, and to be able to communicate and actually teach, because one of the components in the Joseph Lee Gym was that I would give, on the weekends, like drawing and painting lessons to children, young people. Mm-hmm. And that was the case all the way through. So it was always connecting you to a larger mission at a time in the 70s when I think it was really important, because the kinds of imagery that my generation had to put up with and experience had to be combated. Mm-hmm. And murals all over the country, much of which I traveled earlier going to look at so that I could see the kind of murals I didn't want to do as much as the kind of murals I wanted to do. And so that, CETA helped you to get the experience outside of the classroom. Right. You're not in an institution being taught.
Right.
You're actually confronting everything. And it's important because, when you're swinging on scaffold or coming down, people are talking to you. They don't care one bit about what you think about, your isolated context. There's no isolation there. And that was really important. I really enjoyed that.
I would echo Dewey's remarks. Having that $150 a week salary allowed us to explore our media without the pressure of going corporate, getting a real job and hating what you did. So for us, I think the whole development, the concept of community art became legitimized through the help of CETA, and being able to work in the communities to understand what was going down, to develop our own styles without the pressure of economic burden. Because we had a little salary, and we were able to get by eating, bean soup, making our own bread. Nancy and I actually bought a house in San Francisco with our CETA money. It doesn't seem possible.
That was really,
that was a long time ago.
$150 went a long way.
that was real
But
hard.
it couldn't be done today, but at that time you could
That's
buy a
how
house for
important it was.
$60,000.
Well, we had the down payment.
We had a little down payment. Well,
But we had the credibility of a job.
right. That's right. We were able to say to the bank, okay, we're gainfully employed, and therefore we're,
Something.
would you accept our, application for a loan? But anyhow, CETA was wonderful in that sense of opening up doors, I would say.
Yeah.
I would say, being librarian, I was reading all of these things. One of the things the Historical Society did was they did a lot of monographs on blacks in California, because there wasn't a lot of history. And I read about all these blacks, and it was like, frankly, these kids at Saturday school, they didn't really want to get the information that way. And so years later, but because of these monographs, I ended up writing a play, Classic Blacks in 19th century San Francisco. Which, had I not had the CETA job and been exposed to the monographs, I never would have done. Despite the fact that I went to school in San Francisco, I knew none of this history. So for me, it was a way to take, because I feel like that's a lot of what artists, it depends on what your focus is of an artist, but if you're an artist that's out of your community and serving a larger community, then that's one of the things you want to deal with is what is the real history, what is truth. And so that's really one of the projects that specifically was because of CETA that came out of that, And I also, because I became poet in residence, I put on poetry readings, and Art was doing these art gallery things, some of which the conservative board pulled from the walls.
That's right.
Remember that? They were, no, it can't handle that. But it was like Alice Walker was not yet Alice Walker. She was just Alice Walker. And so she came, and I got to be exposed to this and see this sense of artists that were on their way up and developing and things.
And it's so interesting to hear that, an alternative version of the history of San Francisco, which you hadn't really had this kind of multicultural history until this kind of moment. You're kind of embedding, this work was embedding San Francisco in a different history, of a kind of people's history. It's really fascinating. Nancy?
Yeah, I think CETA changed the course of my whole career. And those bios are a little bit old. I mean, when I say career, I mean a 50-year career. But, as I said, before, it was like one community or an Asian community. But CETA helped me develop deep roots in several communities, to the point where I'm often the only Asian in an all Chicano book, for instance, in several Chicano books. And it wouldn't happen if I didn't feel comfortable in all these communities, to the extent that I could make all these relationships. And so when it came time for a silkscreen artist, I was part of the pick, in which I never would have been probably exposed to that person who was doing the book or the show or whatever. So I credit CETA for that. And I also really think that for a lot of people, for a lot of artists, not just me, if we didn't have that 2-3 year window to just do whatever our heart wanted to do, we might have given up as artists. I really think so, because, like Bob said, we needed money. And it was not sustainable to do little odd jobs here and there. There was the heart, but some people had even under the CETA salary, we were struggling. So I would imagine a lot of artists would just go toward the corporate job or whatever job and forget this whole thing. And I just shudder to think how many souls out there were suppressed, and a lot of creative spirit might not have flourished if it wasn't for CETA. It's kind of like we all have the seeds for creativity, but CETA was the soil, the rich soil that made it possible, made all the conditions possible for those seeds to bloom into flowers. And now you see all the results of that. And I am one of the lucky ones that got to bloom under, as an artist. And not only that, but I became one of those who provided the fertile ground for other seeds to grow and bloom too, because it's generations later, and I directed Kearny Street Workshop eventually, so it was possible to then grow another generation of artists and to have them follow their hearts and dreams too. We were the inspiration in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting point that what artists didn't have the opportunity. That's really something to think about. I'd love, Bob, for you to we have some images that you made, and then also there's some images of you working,
Okay.
Dewey. That would be lovely to just hear you kind of share with us your thoughts.
That's Bob's photo, but it's my show. So I'll speak to that. And I wish Bob had been stationed as one of the documenters, because there are very few pictures of what we did during that time. He was stationed at the De Young and did a lot of stuff. But this was at the Western Addition Cultural Center. So with me, after floating around a lot of different cultural centers, I was stationed at the Western Addition Cultural Center. And there was a director, but there wasn't anybody for the gallery. I was it, so it was kind of training by fire, I had to take that space, which was an old bank, and the gallery actually had a bank vault in it. And we had to prime the walls and do all that. and I produced show after show that was pertinent to that community that I was just beginning to know. The first show I did was the Sergeant Johnson exhibit, and the second show was the history of Black theater. 80 photos. The community at that time told me what shows to show there. So there were 80 photos that I had to personally mat and frame and hang it up as best I could. But after a while, I got to implement my own programs, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the show, but this was a very significant show. I think the name was something like 5 Japanese Artists or some name like that. But this is Hisako Hibi, who is, world famous now. But at that time, she was living in the Western Addition, a sweet artist. I met her and I asked her if she wanted to show at the Western Addition Cultural Center. The Western Addition used to be Japanese and Black together before gentrification. It was redevelopment. They built Geary Boulevard right in the middle and split the two communities. And I wanted to bridge the two communities together. So she agreed to show there, and I programmed. I had there's a poster about it, but I had the group Maroon, which was, a lot of Asian American musicians come and perform there at the opening. I personally escorted a lot of people from Japantown to that show. It was a very significant one for me because not only am I bridging cultures, but I am introducing each to each other and also kind of uniting the two cultures together. A lot of people in Japantown never went to the Western Addition, and vice versa. And so that was a very special one. And the fact that everybody loved Hisako Hibi.
One other
came.
a fact about Hisako. When she was about 5 or 6 years old, she and her mother, her whole family were interned in the concentration camps. And during that time, Dorothea Lange was of the WPA, the great photographer. She documented the removal of Japanese Americans from their houses. Hisako Hibi was photographed by Dorothea Lange with her mother with all their belongings and 2 little dolls. It was kind of a very historic picture. I thought I'd bring that up.
This is Sachiko Nakamura, who's another CETA artist. She started the Asian American Dance Collective. And I had her perform at the Western Addition. It wasn't just the gallery. As I became more immersed in the Western Addition, and I became part of their general programming. So this was for a program called Summer Arts Explosion. An Asian American Dance Collective was one of the performers there, because by that time the two cultures were starting to meld together. This is that group Maroon, which became United Front. Oh no, this is United Front, the other group, but it's the same. They changed names. But there you see a very young Mark Isu. Is that Anthony Brown? Anthony Brown and some others. So I was determined to do silkscreen anyway, even though I wasn't hired to. So my excuse was whenever there was an event, I would do a poster as part of my CETA job to promote the event. So that's what I did there, and that's for the summer. No, this is for the open some open house in the summertime. But just to show you that I did do some artwork of my own, even though I was presenting everybody else's artwork. And so that summer Arts Explosion, you could see all the different wonderful groups that were part of that event. It was a very concentrated, intense time, and sometimes we worked till 2 a.m. You know, the other thing about CETA that I loved was not only could I do the work I love, I could do it on my own time. And everybody knows I'm a night owl, and sometimes we would be there till 2 a.m. doing this work, and the judgment was not whether you were 9 to 5, but you know, it was whether you got the work done. And we worked way longer than 9 to 5, but it was on my hours. Right. So this is Bob's.
This is a small series on the Trip Out Truck. I think it was mentioned before in the previous panel. Trip Out Truck was a program sponsored by the DeYoung Museum Art School. They bought 2 old trucks, and they kind of yes, yeah. They bought these old trucks and they repainted them and refurbished them basically. They would get all their supplies from various recycle centers, scrap, and the beginning of scrap, which Bernice Bing actually created. They would take, you know, wooden pieces, anything felt or whatever to make art. And so, yeah, the teachers were also CETA as well. And we were able to go into various schools, elementary schools, and teach art, basically. I think at the time, budgets were pretty tight, and the school systems were needing music and art instruction. So this is a way to bring art to them instead of having it in-house. Mm-hmm. I think probably the same situation is going to exist pretty soon now with the deficits going on. Mm-hmm. But you know, kids would just take off on their own and make things with their hands. You know, there were no computers at the time, so that helped. They were just able to create things, you know, and with the help of the instructors.
Mm-hmm. And Dewey?
Really showing a lot of old pictures.
This is what they...
Yeah.
Go forward one, okay.
Okay. These
Scaffolding.
These very long time ago paintings. Picture images of me. This is, of course, the mural I made at George Washington High School. That's one of them. And this is after coming back from Mexico. And working to bring this mural to a completion. It had been painted somewhere else and then finished there. Actually, this aspect of the mural, I think I'm actually finished with it at this point. And I was explaining something to a photographer, and you know, I got up on this thing to do that. So
I think we have one.
This is, of course, one of the images that stimulated the process, and that, of course, was young African-American students at George Washington in the 1967, 66, had become really riled up about this image, this and a couple of other images. And I before that was also riled up about seeing this. But as a teenager, you don't really quite understand why this image was there. And later, of course, it became very clear. But nonetheless, this is the image that stimulated the mural that I wound up painting because many of the students, particularly some of whom were part of the Black Panther Party, which I had been drawing and documenting through paintings and drawings at that time, had become really irate about this image and wanted it to be destroyed. And of course, the mural came out of that controversy, which started about 1966 or 7, and ended when I finished the mural in 1974. So this particular image is a more recent one, taken by a friend, Lope, who actually got me re-involved in this process as it had come to haunt the school district again 50 years later. Of course, these, as we know, are recurring problems because the founding fathers left us with them.
Maybe to think about where we're coming to the end of our panel here, maybe you could characterize for us CETA's impact locally during the 1970s and maybe over time. How do you reflect on that impact?
Well, I will just say that there are moments historically that where things converge to make things happen that have a profound effect on the culture. And the WPA coming out of that Depression framework was one of them. And it helped to create an artistic, difficult to say, but renaissance in America, in that it gave artists an opportunity, American artists, to really develop a sensibility and an understanding of the aesthetic process and to experience it as makers, to cultivate their skill and be able to get paid a wage to do that. And that created what became the art of the 20th century. Of course, it was aided by expatriates from Europe who were fleeing insanity, and these are recurring moments, as we know even right now. So the CETA came out of a complex, difficult moment too, because the country under Nixon had really become economically seized by a Middle East oil problem and a reconciliation of the end of a colonial period, which was preparing for the 21st century. And so in that context, the economic situation was very difficult. And so in order to make work, they did a very similar thing, because people, like the people we heard about from New York, Kreidler, these other people who understood about that profound moment in American history. And so they fought to make it possible for such a thing to happen again in the last 25 years of the 20th century. And so that produced, I think, the Renaissance that we're looking at now, because many of the artists that were in CETA are now powerful international artists, and they created a language that we have come to understand right now as a profound moment in the ending years of the 20th century. So it is programs like this, or like CETA, that seed creativity, and what culture on earth could exist only as a culture that made money or buildings without seeding the creativity that I don't need to talk about in a place like this, but certainly CETA and programs like it have to join us again, because we are in that moment again. And so hopefully the echo of CETA can emerge once again.
I think too, and I was mentioning it right before we started, that I don't know what percentage of artists were artists of color. I suspect not that many, but we do a lot with a dollar because we're used to it. And so I think that it also allowed more visibility, and when you have more visibility of a few artists of color, then more artists of color go, oh, okay. And so I think it allowed us to lift our arts communities, whatever they were, whether it was visual arts or dance or theater. If you look at the time, that's when we kind of had an explosion. Yes, there had been artists since the 1700s in America that were artists of color, but it was always marginal. And I think that having that support really did help a number of artists, even if they weren't CETA artists, because CETA artists had a certain amount of visibility, and that lifted it.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the impact of CETA on a local level, I mean, you just look at all the organizations that have flourished way beyond the number that was in the 70s. And like I spoke before, there's a whole new generation now of artists, and they're of all different persuasions, which is, and you just look at all the murals that have been done since then, and all the theater productions. We take it for granted now, but back in the 70s, there weren't that many. And all the organizations that I helped, the cultural centers, the little organizations, everything I did in the 70s, they're still around. The exception is the Chinatown Community Arts Gallery. It turned into a bathroom when the hotel got redone. But the Chinese Culture Center is still around, even though it's moving, it's being evicted from the Hilton, but it's moving to another place. So I see, just kind of expanding, and that's the legacy here of CETA. And like I mentioned before, a lot of us may not have been artists if it wasn't for that little gap. And now we teach others to become artists and inspire others to form organizations. I'm just astounded at the number here. But not only here, but elsewhere. I'm from New York, so I know there's a whole bunch of artists and organizations that can trace its roots to CETA's beginnings too. So that's the legacy, I think, of CETA.
No, I think that they're, giving artists titles and positions in community also had such an impact on the young people. Be able to see that an artist, and I remember my poet in residence and my artist in residence, like they have that work and that they're doing work in community that's worthy of doing work, I think is really important for another generation to see. Certainly for me. Thank you all so much for your